I'll be speaking in English. Yes, massive thanks to all the interpreters that they're really facilitating the way that we work, and we can include different colleagues from different parts of the world with different languages. So I'm Sauro Scarpelli. I'm the head of the Global Individuals Risk team, and it's great pleasure to welcome all of you, almost 150 people, to this webinar to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Urgent Action tool. This one was one of the first action tools that Amnesty introduced in 1973. And is still a very strong action tool nowadays. So 50 years after, it's still one of the most popular action tools that we use in the organization, that our activists, that they are taking action through, and also that we have impact through our urgent action work. So this is a great moment to celebrate it. And we couldn't be more lucky than to celebrate and to have with us Tracy, that was the former researcher in the Americas of Amnesty International, that in 1973 she did the first urgent action. So we will hear from her how she came up with the idea of the urgent action and how did it work. So this is a really great moment to go back in history. But then through the webinar, we also go through colleagues in our country and regional teams that will tell us how they're using urgent action nowadays. So we have Mansoureh from the Iran team, Rimmel from the Pakistan team, and Esther from the Nigeria team, that they will share some of their key moments of urgent action in their region that they've been doing recently. And then finally, we are very lucky to have Aurelio from Amnesty France and Ignacio Nacho from Amnesty Spain. They will tell us a little bit about how the UA networks works at national entity level. So how they mobilize the activists, how they use urgent action at the national level. So we think that in this way, we go from the start of urgent action to what urgent action works today, and hearing from the national entities. If we have time, but with such a large number of speakers, we'll see, we can also share with you a couple of statistics about urgent actions that we did in 2022. If there is no time, we can share the report in the chat and you can that if you haven't looked already. But let's see how it goes. Here we are. So without any further introduction, I really would like to invite Tracy to share with us how did she come up with the idea of the urgent action 50 years ago. Over to you, Tracy. We can't hear you, Tracy.
I think. There, I think. Hello again. I'm happy to meet you all today. I've been asked to talk about how the first UA came about, if it had an impact, and if it set a precedent. So how did information on the torture of a Brazilian university professor reach a small human rights organization called Amnesty International, almost 6,000 miles away? And how did an AI action save Professor Luis Basilio Rossi's life? A lot of you are urgent action people, and you'll know a lot about, I think, about Professor Rossi and AI's first UA already. So rather than summarizing all we now know about that UA, I'd like instead to go a bit behind the scenes to give you a feeling for how events developed at the time. So if we could go to slide 2, please. Brazil is a military dictatorship implementing a US-backed counterinsurgency doctrine for Latin America, which promotes the use of extreme measures, including torture, against suspected subversives. The government refuses to admit anyone, including Amnesty and the Organization of American States, to investigate the reports of widespread torture. Slide 3, please. Meanwhile, across the world, AI is still a small organization. There were about 20 staff when I first joined the IS in 1971. Some researchers were covering entire continents. My original brief was Latin America, Portugal, and Portuguese Africa. Cash was tight, as you can see by the budget figures that I put up for some of those early years. And we worked within a very limited mandate, seeking the release of prisoners of conscience and the prevention of torture and the death penalty. But research to identify POCs was slow and laborious. No internet, no email, no fax, no photocopier. But we did have volunteers who sat in our library daily, clipping some British newspapers and Le Monde and the New York Times for articles which they hand delivered to the appropriate researchers twice a day. Sporadically, we got wads of press cuttings from supporters in target countries, but these arrived via snail mail. We had occasional phone calls to and from our target countries, but the lines were crackling and the names and details of prisoners, torture, and disappearance victims had to be laboriously dictated. Occasionally, delegations from target countries call in, and every so often an ancient teletype machine in a corner of our dusty library flutters to life and spews out some teletyped articles. Could we have slide 4, please? This picture of the staff meeting in 1970s will give you some idea of the somewhat scruffy secretariat back in the day. The man on the left, about 3/4 up of this picture taken in our ramshackle library, is Martin Ennals, AI's Secretary General from 1968 to 1980, an epoch of great growth for Amnesty, during which AI got the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977. AI OGs might just recognize some of the others in this picture. Slide 5, please. So in the early 1970s, AI works on torture in Brazil via submissions to governments. I can't quite see, but submissions to governments and to international organizations. But pressure mounts from AI's newly emerging specialists and coordination groups who are working with Brazilians abroad, pressing for AI to do more to protect Brazilian detainees believed to be at risk of torture. Secretary General Martin Ennals calls a small special weekend meeting to respond. He invites Amina de Carvalho, a well-known Brazilian lawyer exiled in France, who's one of the main leaders of those who are pressing AI to take more action. Over pizza lunch, I float the idea of a new action technique whose very name would make clear that we are not suggesting the person is a POC, but are acting urgently to protect that person from torture. I suggest we call such actions urgent actions. We need an IEC decision to proceed. The IEC approves in principle the testing out of urgent actions on Brazil appeals in April 1972 and formally ratifies this decision in 1972 at its meeting in Utrecht. On February 15, 1973, Luis Facilio Rossi is arrested in Brazil. AI receives information that he is being tortured. 19 March 1973, AI launches an urgent action on behalf of Professor Rossi's alleged torture. Could I have the next slide, please? This is page, but you may not know that Professor Rossi's urgent action was actually a case sheet, and here's the case sheet. In it, we give our sources for the case as a Brazilian newspaper and private sources in Brazil. Over the years, we learned more about who these sources were and how they got the information on Luis's arrest, but I'll come to that. Can I have slide 7, please? So this slide 7 is the second page of the case sheet on Luis Rossi. You'll see that it ends saying that the groups to whom his case have been assigned will find enclosed several stenciled lists of instructions for further actions on the case, addresses to contact, and ideas of other organizations and people that might take up the case and support their appeal. We say that this final page of instructions is of particular relevance to this case. We would suggest that groups turn to these specific instructions immediately after reading the general stencil directions on the basic methods of working. But I don't have these all these lists at home in my files at AI Memorabilia. So could we have the next slide, please? I do have, however, this flyer for an ISDEF meeting to mark 25 years of urgent actions, which quotes the first line of our action recommendations on Professor Rossi's case. Please act as quickly as possible. Time may be crucial in locating Professor Rossi or even helping to save his life. Could I have the next slide, please? But these action recommendations did not go just to the adoption groups assigned to his case. We made stacks of the appeal using a pre-photocopier and now thankfully obsolete machine called a mimeograph, which printed copies by pressing ink through a stencil onto paper, which was hand cranked through rollers, slow and messy. We then sent copies of these case sheets out widely by snail mail to some of the addresses I've already described. And was this first AI's UA successful? Well, what was the impact on Luis's case? 2 weeks of silence. Then AI receives a letter from Maria Jose, written on the stationery of DOPS. These are the bad guys, the military intelligence police, allegedly responsible for the torture. The letter says that Maria Jose has been able to visit her husband in prison and he's fine, he's not being tortured, and international action on his case is not necessarily and should stop. But the letter is written on DOPS stationery, as I said, so it just doesn't ring true. 10 days later, a second letter from Maria Jose arrives at AI headquarters. She says that she was forced to write the first letter in DOPS headquarters and that in fact, she was able to see Luis and knows that he has been tortured, but also saw a stack of letters written on his behalf and thinks and is convinced that these have saved his life. The last piece of the puzzle I only get in January 2023. How did Professor Rossi's wife, Maria Jose, know how to contact AI? We'll come back to that. Can we go to the next slide, please? This slide shows some of the testimonies we eventually got from Maria Jose and Luis about how AI action had saved his life. The dictatorship falls in 1985. Maria Jose becomes the founder member of AI Brazil and sets up and coordinates the section's health network. In 1987, AI holds its AGM in Brazil and learns much more from Maria Jose about how she got the information on her husband's arrest and torture out of Brazil. Her phone lines were cut off and the house was surrounded by military police for 2 weeks after her husband's arrest. So she writes down what happened, balls up the piece of paper, throws it over the fence to a neighbor's daughter who is told to get it into the hands of a progressive local bishop. He transmits the information to Louvain in Belgium, a known center of liberation of theology, clergy, and they get her information and the balled up letter to AI in London. Could I have the next slide, please? But it's not until 1995 that Professor Rossi and I finally meet at the first meeting of AI's Latin American UA coordinators in Sao Paulo. So the next slide asks, did the first AUA create a precedent? The simple answer is yes. In this slide, I've tried to look into the immediate steps that were taken on the UA, and I'll just mention a few here. You might be interested to know that the first published mention of an urgent action was in the Brazil entry in AI's 1972-73 annual report. An important step was when AI initiated a worldwide campaign on torture after its Paris conference. A new campaign against torture team called CAT was followed, creating the conference in 1973. And this special unit and a special unit within it was formed to centralize and systematize UAs and assist sections in building up their networks. Impact on other cases. AI Steering Committee on Research and Action, SCRA, reported in 1998 that in the 1/3 of the UA cases that they had surveyed, there had been some improvement in the situation of those concerned. You'll have more up-to-date statistics. Beyond AI, many NGOs and intergovernmental bodies that didn't even exist at the time of AI's first UA, like the UN Special Rapporteurs and its working groups on torture and disappearance, create individual appeals mechanisms that appeared to echo AI's original UA initiative. Next slide, please. What was the impact of the UA on global human rights work? Some academic studies have suggested that AI's first UA and its impact on Professor Rossi's case was a key development in the explosion of transnational activism in Latin America in the 1970s, first in Brazil and then later in Chile and other countries in Latin America. AI's decision was also said to, and Professor Rossi's case was said to have contributed to and reflected the emphasis of the human rights movement. From expressions of simple concern to promotion of justice through politics and law. I've given the details on these sources in case anybody wants to follow up these detailed examinations of AI's AI project, UA project, excuse me. Next slide, please. In closing, Christopher Wren was the architect of St. Paul's Cathedral in London. The inscription on his tomb says in Latin, "Reader, if you seek his monument, look around you." And I think the greatest monument and the greatest indicator of the impact that the UA has had are all of you, urgent action coordinators and their supporters who are here representing all those people, your membership, and all those people over the years who have acted on UAs and supported UA action. And then finally, I get the last piece of information. How did Maria Jose know to get in touch with Amnesty? We had a message from the Belgian Flemish section in January announcing the news to AI of Luis Basilio Rossi's death. They concluded their message saying, "May his story remind us of how we are interconnected as a movement, and may this keep us inspired to continue to take urgent action." Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Tracy. This is incredible, and thank you for going through all the history and the work that you did in 1973. Is really really important to hear how this action was created and the impact they had on the first action, and that's continued to have in the years. And I knew there was some Italian part to the urgent action, and the fact that it was created during a pizza lunch, that explained a lot of it. So now it makes all sense. Thank you. Thank you so much. We don't have time for questions after each speakers, but at the end of all the speakers, we should have about 10 minutes for question and answer. In case you have any questions, please, you can write them in the chat, and either the speakers or someone else from the team, Nikki or Emily or May or Hannah, could respond to your questions if they're more general about the UA of today. Thank you again, Tracy. Really, really appreciate your participation to this webinar. I would like now to introduce Mansoureh, that she works at the International Secretariat in the Iran team, to share in 5 minutes some of her experience of urgent action on Iranian individuals. Over to you, Mansoureh.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Mansoureh, and I'm one of the Iran researchers at the IS, and I will be speaking English today. It's really good to be here. So I think the Iran team does the most UAs out of the whole organization, and that's pretty much been the case since I've been in the team for, gosh, 11 years now, I think. And this is because we always have a significant number of individual cases on Iran, and because UAs are an extremely effective campaigning tool for us. I thought it might be good to talk about some of the impact of our UAs. The most recent example of which is the release of LGBTI rights defender Zahra Siddiqui Hamadani and another woman named Elham Choubdar. And both of these individuals were sentenced to death last year due to their real or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity, and for their social media activities in support of LGBTI communities in Iran. Amnesty International sections have heavily campaigned on these individuals since last year, even during the uprising since September, and their cases would not have received as much attention globally without Amnesty's campaigning through our UAs on them and UA updates on them. Another recent example is a large group UA that we currently have on the use of the death penalty against protesters in Iran. So given the large number of people at risk of the death penalty in relation to the recent protests that have been ongoing since September last year, and the interest from sections as well as media, we decided that the most strategic way to campaign on this issue and on the individuals would be through a group UA. And as a result, thanks to campaigning by sections, including lobbying efforts, as well as media focus, the cases of those at risk have received significant attention both globally and domestically in Iran. And as a result of all of our efforts, some of the individuals in the UA, in the original UA, because it's been updated a number of times, have had their death sentences quashed and are no longer at risk. And Iranian human rights defenders have told us that continued public campaigning on these protest death penalty cases through this large group UA is really important, because the Iranian authorities are less likely to execute individuals whose cases continue to receive this public attention. And so our plan is to continue updating this UA as long as people are still at risk of the death penalty in relation to the protests. Finally, I wanted to give another example of impact on Iran UAs, but this time it's related to a historically significant type of impact. So UAs generally have like 6 to 8 week campaign timelines, but they can have huge significance decades later. So in 1988, the Iranian authorities forcibly disappeared and extrajudicially executed thousands of political dissidents who were imprisoned at the time. At the time, Amnesty issued 16 urgent actions, mobilizing our members to send telegrams, telexes, and letters to the Iranian authorities, calling on them to end the prison massacres. Since then, however, the Iranian authorities embarked on a decades-long campaign of denying and distorting the truth about these mass killings. So in 2018, on the 30th anniversary of these prison massacres, Amnesty published a groundbreaking 200-page report on the mass killings, and we included the details of all of these urgent actions in the report. The report concluded that the Iranian authorities are committing crimes against humanity through their extrajudicial execution and ongoing enforced disappearance of these thousands of political dissidents. And this was a really groundbreaking analysis at the time. So last year, Amnesty's report, which included our urgent actions, was used as evidence during a historic trial which took place in Sweden under the principle of universal jurisdiction. The court convicted a former Iranian judicial over crimes in relation to these prison massacres. The Swedish court sentenced this former Iranian official, Hamid Nouri, to life imprisonment. So for more than 3 decades, survivors and relatives of the thousands of political dissidents who were extrajudicially killed and forcibly disappeared struggled to get truth and justice. And with this first ever ruling against an Iranian official, they finally were able to witness someone held to account for these crimes. So, and I wanted to note these UAs because they really provided a historical record that has had enormous significance, not just for AI's work and campaigning and an acknowledgement of all the amazing work that sections have done throughout the decades, but also it's a historical moment. The UA's culminated in a historical moment of truth and justice to the victims of families of victims, as well as Iranian human rights defenders and others who have spent more than 30 years looking for truth and justice for these crimes. So I think my time is up, so I'll leave it there. And what I was going to do is, if I can, I will upload one of the 1988 UAs to the chat, if that's okay, just in case people are interested. Thank you.
Yeah, please do that, Mansoureh, and thank you so much. And it's so so important to hear about the successes, the impact that the UAs are having. And as you say, you know, UAs are public documents, so not only provide a kind of an historic background to see what Amnesty has been doing, but also each of them is used as a public document put out in the public domain. That is very important. So thank you so much. From Iran, let's go to Pakistan. I think Rimmel is with us, and she's working on Pakistan, and she will tell us a little bit about a very specific UAs that the team did a few years back. Over to you, Rimmel.
Thank you, Sauro. And these are tough acts to follow, so I hope I can do it justice. And honestly, the urgent action is one of my favorite campaigning tools. It's always been something that I think has, you know, you put in a little bit of effort and you just get such incredible results. And one example of that was, of course, the UA that we did back in November 2019, which was an urgent action for the people of Lahore, which has recently again been categorized as the world's most polluted city, with air quality becoming a significant issue. And now we have a season. And at the time, it had been, I want to say, I think it was the third year that smog had really been a huge problem in Lahore. And we noticed that, you know, people were scrambling for something to do. They wanted to take action of this. And they also didn't really have the vocabulary to be able to sort of demonstrate and explain how this was impacting them. And so we kept thinking, you know, we're talking about climate change all the time, and we're looking at a way to sort of characterize all of these issues as human rights issues. And there is an urgency here, and there's an entire group of people. Why don't we leverage this incredible tool that we have that makes people stop and think that some of their human rights are being violated, right? And so we decided to issue an urgent action for the entire city of Lahore, because everybody in Lahore was at risk, and Lahore at the time was becoming sort of a ground zero for climate activism in Pakistan as well. So to that end, when we published the urgent action, it went everywhere. It was viral. The media picked it up, from the New York Times to AP to Newsweek to Time Magazine, The Guardian. Everybody was just like, hang on, Amnesty International has just issued an urgent action for the people of Pakistan. And it was the first time that people began to take it seriously, because the problem with something like smog or air quality is because it's so ubiquitous and it's so inaccessible. It's something that seems so out of reach and so beyond your control to be able to fix. We gave them, hey, this is a person you can reach out to. This is an act recommendations that we are making. Write them a letter. And we found that within a week of issuing the urgent action, we had Imran Khan, who was the prime minister at the time. Imran Khan came out and announced the Green Clean Index for Pakistan and admitted to air quality being a human rights problem. So they were basically using the same language that we had used in the urgent action. So what we found was that we could really use the sort of status that urgent actions have had historically to be able to expand it and evolve it into looking at different areas that Amnesty wouldn't typically speak of, or hadn't at that point ventured out. And it was a great entry point for us to have to start the conversation, to give people something to do. And I think that ultimately it really helped sort of elevate Pakistan's position as a victim of poor air quality, whereas the discourse had at the time sort of been limited to China and to India, and now Pakistan, which really needed that attention. It was really important to get this message across succinctly, give people something to do, and I'll stop there because I'm conscious of the time and looking forward to any questions that you might have. Thank you, Sauro.
Thank you so much, Rimmel, to be so brief and to the point as well. And yes, it was a breakthrough urgent action. It was the first time that we did an urgent action for such a vast amounts of people. And I remember at the Secretariat, we were thinking, will it be successful or not? Will sections pick up on this one? Will work or not? And it was. So it was a really great to see also how urgent action with the years, they evolve and they change their nature to adapt to the needs around there. I just remind everybody that we'll have some time at the end if you have questions, but if you have specific questions to the speakers, you can maybe write them in the chat, and then the speakers or someone from the global individual service team can respond to that. So thank you, Rimmel, again. I'm not sure if Esther, yes, Esther from the Nigeria team, I know you had problem to
just like to speak to two stories from Nigeria about how effective urgent actions have been over the years. The first one I would talk about is the story of over 230 women who are internally displaced people in Northeast Nigeria. So in the context of the conflict that had happened in that part of the country for over a decade, women and children were displaced from their homes, and they had to relocate to internally displaced camps. The information got to Amnesty Nigeria that they were being denied food. Why were they being denied access to food? Because these women formed themselves into a very strong movement where they were doing a lot of activism. Their children had been taken away. Their sons had been detained in unknown detention facilities across Northeast Nigeria. And of course, even while they were at the IDP camps, their activism never stopped. They kept speaking out, they kept demanding for justice, they kept asking the authorities to speak up about the whereabouts of their children. And as a strategy to silence them, the authorities denied them access to food and planned to return them back home forcibly. And I would say when the information got to Amnesty Nigeria, urgent action was, of course, the quickest tool that came to my mind as a campaigner. And this, of course, gave out a lot of information, made it public. And one thing that's achieved for this group of women, they are known as the NIFA women. And it will interest you to know that these women are still there. They're still very active. Many of them are no longer in IDP camps now, they are home, and they've also been able to get their husbands released and even some of their sons released as well. So this is very, very great to know. So the women also, as they began to do a lot of activism and Amnesty supported with the urgent action tool, that came to the attention of the humanitarian agencies in the Northeast. Of course, state authorities had to speak up. And of course, that brought them to the limelight. Humanitarian agencies there scaled up efforts and actually reached out to this group of women and ensured that they had access to food in less than 2 weeks. That made a huge impact, I would say, on the lives of women. It also happened at the time when they were having the Ramadan fast. And of course, you know what it means not to have access to food during Ramadan. So that was really impactful. It got public attention very quickly. All the stakeholders, the people that needed to act, the humanitarian agencies, as well as state authorities, knew they had to do something. And that was what happened because they went to food. Secondly, I would like to also share a very recent one, which had to do with the story of Emmanuel and Victor Anene, two young activists who were arrested and beaten for wearing t-shirts wearing t-shirts in protest against the state of human rights in Nigeria. And of course, they were also distributing leaflets, just saying state authorities need to do more when it comes to human rights. They need to protect human rights. And for protesting, they were arrested, they were tortured. And when we got the information at the office, of course, we quickly put up an urgent action targeting state authorities to release them. It will interest you to know that after 72 days, they were freed from detention, and they were told that why did they tell this to Amnesty? How did Amnesty get to know about this? So I think there's just something that the urgent action tool does. Once the case goes public, the perpetrators of these human rights violations know they no longer have a hiding place, and they quickly move on to action. It could be speaking up to the media, trying to save their face and make very funny statements. But either way, what the urgent action tool achieves is that it's able to bring out this case. It just brings all of the attention. They know they can no longer hide, and they need to do the needful. So for the case of these two young boys, they were released from detention. And of course, the quote up there was what we got from one of them when they were released. And he said, one thing is certain, that Amnesty International played a great role in calling for our release, and they deeply appreciate it. So here in Nigeria, of course, we celebrate this powerful tool with the life of, with the impact that is achieved in the lives of people. We celebrate this great tool, also looking at how it has come to stay, and even the other greater impact that it will achieve in the future. And I will not forget to add this, that our local partners in Nigeria, they always want us to find the most urgent way to really draw attention to cases of human rights violations. And they've come to know that we have this powerful tool. So for our supporters, for our local partners, they really understand how this works. They said it works like magic because it's the quickest thing. And I also want to talk about the levels of approval. It comes very quickly, and then it's like the quickest thing that can be done when there is a very serious issue. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther. Really, really interesting to hear different ways that urgent action have impact or have had impact in Nigeria. Incredible. Wonderful. Now we're going to listen from a couple of colleagues from national entities where they're telling us a little bit about how their urgent action networks or what do they do on national level. And I would like to remind all the speakers to speak slowly because we have interpreters that they are interpreting live the speakers. So over to you, Ignacio, from Amnesty Spain, that I think will be speaking in Spanish.
Hola a todos y todas. Muchísimas gracias por invitarnos a este espacio. Soy Nacho Montanos, llevo la coordinación del trabajo por personas en riesgo en Amnistía Internacional España y voy a hablar en español. Como os decía, muchas gracias, Sauro y todo el resto del equipo por esta invitación, porque para nosotros las acciones urgentes han sido y siguen siendo una herramienta fundamental para nuestro trabajo, tanto de campaña como de incidencia. Vamos a compartir, o queríamos compartiros, algo que en otros espacios ya lo hemos hecho, que es nuestra red de apelantes de acciones urgentes. Una red que comenzó hace casi 20 años, hace un montón de tiempo, ¿no? Nuestra idea era crear una base de datos amplia de personas que estuvieran dispuestas a escribir a las autoridades de las acciones urgentes que les enviáramos, ¿no? Nuestro objetivo claro era distribuir a cuanto más ampliamente mejor las acciones urgentes lo más posible, ¿no? Para ello, aparte de ir animando y haciendo crecer esta base de datos de personas interesadas en participar en la red de acciones urgentes, diseñamos una herramienta informática, porque a estas personas les ofrecíamos la posibilidad de que eligieran el número de acciones urgentes que querían enviar cada mes, de qué temáticas, cuáles eran sus países, de manera que pudiéramos proporcionarles acciones en número en las que pudieran ellos y ellas responder, y también en temáticas y países que fueran de su máximo interés. Aparte de este trabajo, de este diseño de herramientas, creamos un equipo de personas voluntarias que se encargaban de toda esta distribución de las acciones a la red. y además de la distribución de la acción, se encargaba de recibir todas las respuestas de las autoridades que nuestros apelantes recibían por enviar sus acciones, que son muchas. Es sorprendente la cantidad de respuestas que se reciben de las autoridades a las que nos dirigimos. Ellos, las personas de la red, nos las remitían a nosotros de manera que la pudiéramos hacer llegar a la oficina internacional. También se encargan de responder a todas las dudas y preguntas que tienen nuestros apelantes, y también la elaboración de un boletín de buenas noticias que hacemos cada 6 meses, que, como aquí se ha dicho, ¿no? Son muchas las buenas noticias que nos llegan y nos resulta muy importante, y sabemos que es muy motivador para nuestras personas de la red recibir estas buenas noticias y estos mensajes de agradecimiento. Así hemos funcionado durante mucho tiempo. Hubo, como sabéis, un cambio importante, ¿no? en nuestras red de acciones urgentes, en nuestras acciones urgentes, que fue el paso de que se incluyera la carta de apelación directamente en la acción. Antes no era así. Esto coincidió pues ya con un abandono del papel, ¿no? En todos los efectos, con lo cual pues en nuestra propia red tuvimos que hacer cambios importantes. El primero es abandonar el envío de las acciones urgentes en formato papel, lo que supuso, lo que no fue fácil, porque aunque parezca increíble, hubo muchas personas que nos seguían pidiendo que por favor se lo enviáramos en papel, pero aquí se agradeció mucho porque pudimos dar de baja a una máquina realmente difícil de manejar, como son las ensobradoras. Para hacer esto de forma rápida y tal, pues conseguimos que saliera de la oficina, no con cierta pena. Y ahora ya no enviamos las acciones urgentes adjuntas en un correo electrónico, sino que lo que enviamos es un link a nuestra web. Cambios importantes, ¿no? Y cambios que bueno, pues supuso también, que ha supuesto pues también amoldarnos a los nuevos tiempos y a las nuevas técnicas. Eso también supuso, pues también temas de protección de datos, muchas cosas, que el número de personas a lo mejor de la red disminuyera, pero en contrapartida hemos tenido una información más clara y fehaciente de cuántas personas envían acciones urgentes, cosa que antes no teníamos tanta información. Y hemos descubierto que este grupo, esta base de datos, con mucho tiempo colaborando, es además un grupo de personas muy implicada. Prácticamente, fácilmente, por cada acción urgente que enviamos, el 50% de las acciones que enviamos, las personas la abren y entran en la web y envían la acción urgente. Calculamos que alrededor de, por cada acción urgente, porque enviamos casi todas las acciones que desde la Oficina Internacional nos enviáis, se estarán enviando entre 80 y 100 cartas a las autoridades del país, que creemos que es un número interesante e importante, ¿no? Evidentemente, pues con retos de seguir creciendo y de mejorar y de seguir también escuchando la base de datos para ver cómo mejoramos. Pero bueno, creemos que está siendo y ha sido pues una experiencia muy importante para la sección, y esta herramienta de acciones urgentes ha sido fundamental para ello.
Muchas gracias, Nacho. It's really interesting to hear how Amnesty Spain has organized and adapted to the new technological challenges with UAs, and also see how many of the urgent action you guys sending out is great. The last time we did a survey of the urgent action network globally, we had over 600,000 people in the network. So it's really large globally. That doesn't mean that every UA received or everybody to take action, but the pool is very, very large. And now that fit quite well with Aurelio, our last speaker from Amnesty France, that will tell us how Amnesty France has adapted urgent action as an SMS tool. So again, looking at technology. Over to you, Aurelio.
Oui, bonjour à toutes et à tous et merci beaucoup pour l'invitation. Donc, je suis Aurelio Pérez et je suis chargé des missions pour la défense des personnes en danger Amnesty France. Je vais vous parler d'une application web pour faire des actions urgentes depuis notre portable smartphone. C'est un outil qu'on a développé dans notre section et qui est censé faire évoluer ces méthodes d'action qui nous est très chère, Amnesty France, qui c'est très important pour nos militantes et nos militants. Donc, cette application web permet de prendre connaissance d'une action urgente rapidement et d'interpeller les autorités via notre smartphone en quelques clics. Alors, cet outil est constitué d'un réseau de membres. Donc, il y a 11 000 personnes qui se sont inscrites à notre dispositif. Et on contacte ces personnes en fait 1 ou 2 fois par mois via un SMS et qui arrive à leur smartphone et où ils peuvent, que vous pouvez les voir sur l'écran. Et si tu peux passer, Émilie, à la prochaine écran. Et donc, quand on clique sur les liens qu'il y a dans les SMS, on arrive à une application web. Alors, on dit application web parce qu'il n'y a pas besoin de télécharger une application. Donc, ça s'ouvre automatiquement sur notre navigateur parce qu'on pensait que c'était une meilleure idée que de demander aux gens d'installer une application. Normalement, on a des problèmes d'espace dans nos portables, donc on préférait passer par ce type d'application web qui en plus est moins chronophage pour la développer et moins cher. Donc, voilà, là, vous savez les premiers écrans. C'est une action urgente pour Vanessa Mendoza qui est poursuivie en justice en Andorre pour avoir défendu les droits à l'avortement. Donc, dans l'écran du centre, vous savez l'action urgente qui est résumée. Donc, il y a 2 ou 3 écrans comme celui-ci qui explique la situation très brièvement et avec une tonalité plus accessible en fait et plus impactant. Et puis, le dernier écran, donc à droite et jaune, vous savez, on a les nombres des personnes qui participent à l'action urgente à ce moment-là. Donc, si tu peux passer, Émilie. Voilà, et là, c'est les prochains écrans où on peut voir l'objet du mail qu'on va envoyer aux autorités et qu'on peut modifier, ou qu'on peut choisir l'objet qu'on désire. Et puis, après, on a les mails qu'on peut aussi modifier. Donc, après, il y a un écran avec notre identité pour mettre nos prénoms, notre nom de famille et l'email. Et si on clique sur « Voir l'email », sur l'écran de smartphone, tu peux passer, Émilie, s'il te plaît. On arrive ça va s'ouvrir automatiquement dans notre smartphone, notre boîte mail de notre compte email avec l'email proposé dans l'action urgente originelle, donc qui vient du secrétaire international et qui est aussi et reprend pas mal les arguments juridiques. Est-ce que c'était important pour nous parce qu'on ne voulait pas rester juste dans quelque chose d'impactant au niveau de la communication ou pour attirer juste des nouveaux publics d'une façon simple, entre guillemets, sinon qu'on voulait aussi garder cette expertise d'Amnesty International qui nous semble essentielle. Et ça, c'est plutôt dans les corps du mail. Et tu peux passer, Émilie. Voilà, et là, c'est la fin de l'action, c'est-à-dire qu'on a envoyé l'email aux autorités concernées, notamment, et on met aussi l'ambassade en France en copie. Et on peut partager cette action urgente via la messagerie instantanée, par exemple WhatsApp, ou via nos réseaux sociaux, par exemple Twitter. Et c'est une méthode d'action assez efficace parce que, comme je vous ai dit, il y a 11 000 personnes inscrites. Dans les réseaux classiques, c'est-à-dire par email, il y a 9 000 personnes. Et chaque action urgente qu'on envoie via les smartphones, il y a environ 3 000 personnes, et je parle sans sponsorisation, pardon, qui font l'action urgente. Donc, c'est 3 000 personnes sur 11 000, c'est un très bon ratio. Et ça permet aussi très facilement d'être partagé, en fait, parce qu'il suffit de copier, coller les liens pour les transmettre à d'autres personnes, et aussi pour, par exemple, contacter des influenceurs, des influenceuses, d'autres médias de communication, d'autres associations, par exemple aussi ou même des membres de la diaspora ici en France, pour partager cette action urgente. Et donc, ça nous permet aussi d'avoir des stratégies ciblées par situation, en fait, et pouvoir faire des stratégies différentes selon la thématique ou les pays. Donc voilà, je voulais vous parler aussi de pourquoi on a créé cet outil. Et en fait, c'est un objectif important pour nous, c'est de trouver de nouveaux publics et notamment des publics jeunes pour participer à ces services. Que ce qu'on cherche, c'est qu'ils soient en forme de mobilisation innovante et accessible. Donc, pour donner quelques éléments de contexte, on avait fait une étude, un sondage d'opinion en fait, qui témoigne des évolutions sociales en France et qui dit que les jeunes ne se mobilisent pas moins, mais autrement, et d'une façon plus multi-identitaire, multi-thématique. Enfin, c'est-à-dire, ils et elles sont sur plusieurs luttes. Ils peuvent agir sur différents sujets. Et la web app se prête, l'application web Action Urgente se prête très bien à ça. Et aussi, ils cherchent à faire des actions concrètes qu'on puisse voir aussi l'impact de notre action. Et donc, l'Action Urgente se prête aussi très bien à cet objectif. Donc, le projet, il a commencé, pour vous dire un peu l'historique, il a commencé en mai 2017. Donc, 2018-2019, on a beaucoup travaillé sur les aspects techniques et éditoriaux. Et donc, on a fait des tests quantitatifs avec 3000 personnes membres d'Amnesty qui on avait envoyé une première action urgente. Et après, on a fait des groupes de discussion, donc plus qualitatifs, en fait, pour échanger avec 10 personnes qui faisaient partie ou pas d'Amnesty, qui étaient membres ou pas d'Amnesty, pour avoir les retours. Et notamment, c'était des jeunes. En mars 2021, après, en mars 2021, pardon, on a lancé la première action urgente sur la web app, sur la femme ACDI. Et en mai 2021, on avait déjà 4300 membres dans l'application. Et les 66%, c'était des nouvelles personnes qui n'avaient jamais agi avec Amnesty. Donc, l'objectif de trouver de nouveaux publics est réussi. Et voilà, parmi les centaines d'actions urgentes qu'on reçoit, des actions urgentes classiques qu'on reçoit du secrétaire international, on sélectionne, comme je vous ai dit, 1 ou 2 par mois. Et en fonction des différents critères, mais on essaye de croiser des objectifs de communication et des objectifs aussi du pôle action où je travaille, et donc de partager un peu les différentes expertises qu'il peut avoir Amnesty. Et puis, on essaye aussi d'avoir un équilibre, une diversité des pays et des thématiques pour faire de ces stratégies un peu plus pointues en fonction de la situation et toucher différents publics. Et bien sûr, on essaye de maintenir un équilibre entre défendre des personnes qui sont déjà médiatisées et avec des personnes, entre guillemets, oubliées, pour revenir un peu à l'ADN d'Amnesty. Donc, on essaie aussi de maintenir, bien sûr, un équilibre de genre. Et pour vous parler un peu de problèmes, parce qu'évidemment, même si pour l'instant, on trouve que c'est un moyen d'action plutôt efficace, on fait bien évidemment face à quelques problèmes. Donc, pour vous donner un exemple, on a souvent le problème que les autorités voient leur boîte mail saturée, parce qu'il y a des milliers d'emails en très peu de temps. Et soit elles sont saturées, soit des fois les autorités bloquent ces adresses mail. Donc, en cours de route, il faut qu'on cherche des nouvelles adresses mail ou des nouvelles cibles. Et ce qui est un peu contraignant pendant 2-3 jours parce qu'il faut être très alerte de ça. Et de plus en plus d'autorités ne permettent pas de les contacter via email, et donc elles font par exemple des questionnaires online qui ne sont pas compatibles avec cette application web. Et donc, on essaie de développer des modalités pour proposer d'interpeller pas seulement par email, mais aussi par Facebook, Twitter ou Instagram ou d'autres moyens. Et finalement, pour vous donner quelques indices de ce qu'on est en train de préparer, on voudrait créer en fait quelque chose qui ne soit pas descendant, entre guillemets, qui ne soit pas juste en fait un contact de nous, on envoie un SMS aux personnes membres du réseau, mais qu'il y a plus d'échanges en fait, et de créer une sorte de communauté un peu plus interactive, plus dynamique. Et donc, on s'inspire d'Amnesty Espagne, notamment parce qu'ils et elles ont créé un canal Telegram. On est en train de réfléchir sur les types de messagerie instantanée où on pourrait créer un canal, mais en tout cas, pour lancer ces actions urgentes et pour permettre que les membres du réseau construisent avec nous autant l'application que les stratégies, que pour se donner des nouvelles sur les personnes concernés, on puisse avoir ces canaux. Donc voilà, merci beaucoup. Si je reste à votre disposition si vous avez des questions.
Merci, Aurelio, and it's great to see innovation on the way that we use UAs like the SMS network in Amnesty France. We are out of time, so we will not have time for questions. I'm sorry, but I saw that there's been several questions in the chat that have been answered, so thank you very much. We will not also have time to present some of the statistics of the UAs in 2022, but the report will be shared in the chat as well as all the presentations that you've seen during this webinar have been shared in the chat. And when we will have the recording, we will share widely so you can share with colleagues, activists, and other people that were not able to join the webinar today. I found it extremely interesting, and I'm really happy that we were able to put together all these amazing speakers sharing their experience, and with all of us UAs is a great tool. It's a great tool. It's very popular, and it has an impact, a very big impact that is very important. So the last things I would like to do is to thank, first of all, the interpreter and the LRC for helping with the interpretation of this webinar that really allow us to reach out to many more people. Thanking the speakers, in particular Tracy, that she came back to Amnesty to do this presentation, bringing us back into the past. So thank you very much. And to all the other speakers that have been with us today. And finally, I would like to thank the global individual service team, Emily, Hannah, May, and Nikki, for working so actively on urgent action and helping to put this webinar together. I would like to say we'll see you in the next 50th anniversary, but I don't think I'll be there. So maybe some of you will be there, but I will definitely not be there. But I want to thank you so much again, and hopefully you found this interesting as I did. Thank you very much, and goodbye, everybody.